been addressed yet. It also serves to gather information on any new or emerging risks which may need additional recommendations. When I review the status of the recommendations, I request that the Director provide an update with the actions taken to address each finding. I then make a judgment call as to whether I feel that the actions are sufficient or whether more needs to be done to completely resolve the underlying issues. In this case, 8 of the original 14 recommendations have been completed, 2 are still in progress, and 4 have not been started yet, which I'll speak about in a minute. So overall, 15 of the 17 staff in the division felt that the audit recommendations have had a positive impact on the division. The 2 people who did not see the impact were new staff who were uncertain that they could comment because they had nothing to compare to. There were many positive impacts made through the implementation of the recommendations, which I'll highlight here. First, the division went through an exercise to jointly create a vision and mission for the division. So just to refresh your memory, the division consists of 4 sections, which include mail services, council and committee services, licensing, and corporate archives and records. So previously they were mostly separate silos, and so this was an exercise to have a common vision and purpose for the division. And it was seen by staff to be a great team-building exercise that helped unify the division and cut across some of those historical silos between the 4 sections. Next, there was an improvement in communications in a number of areas. Licensing staff is communicating better with their stakeholders through a creation of a joint task force. Management is communicating better with staff in terms of decisions made, initiatives, and expectations of staff. And staff are communicating better with one another through the use of a whiteboard, which shows what everyone's working on, through monthly staff meetings in each section, and monthly management meetings. Third, there's been a significant time savings realized through the consolidation of the licensing and clerk's cash drawers. There used to be 2 separate cashiers at the front counter. They've been consolidated into 1 cash drawer. It used to take up to half a day for one person to reconcile the deposit to the bank from the 2 separate drawers, and now it takes 15 minutes because the process has been simplified. There has been some work completed in relation to documenting desk procedures and cross-training staff on various roles, and staff appreciate this in times of staff turnover, vacation, or absence when they need to cover for each other in order to get the work done. Overall, the culture has greatly improved and the staff appear to be much happier than they were 4 years ago. And as mentioned, those silos have started to break down between the sections, communication has improved, and management is much more involved in engaging with staff. There were also several other process improvements which continue to evolve since the division now has a continuous improvement mindset, and they aim to remove waste and add value to the customer wherever possible. One great example is the Committee of Adjustment process. Previously, staff had to prepare, fold, stuff, and address notices to residents, which was a very manual and time-consuming process. They have moved this process to mail services to take advantage of the equipment to fold and stuff envelopes. They've also decreased the number of notices sent out to residents to only those that are required by the legislation. Overall, the staff time to complete the process has decreased significantly. Next, I'll talk about the unaddressed issues and new risks. As in most areas of the city, the workload of the division continues to grow as the city's population grows. This division in particular has had some hard times over the last 4 years. For various reasons, they have seen a very high level of turnover or temporary staffing situations due to multiple parental leaves, sick leaves, retirements, and attrition. So they've constantly been trying to catch up on workload as people leave and new staff are trained. The lack of trained backups and written desk procedures in every role has made this difficult. That anomaly aside, though, I had identified in the original audit that the corporate records and archives section was understaffed and should request 1 more FTE. Due to budget constraints, this has not happened yet. The demand for this service continues to increase as the amount of electronic records continues to skyrocket. This presents legal and reputation risks if not staffed appropriately. The Council and Committee Services section has seen an increase in the length of committee and council meetings, which adds to their workload and puts pressure on the division. And the licensing section has also seen an increase in workload due to an increase in the number of tasks instituted by new management, including attending regular staff meetings, tracking activity for capacity analysis, and documenting desk procedures, all of which are very critical tasks, but something that they hadn't been doing in the past. They've also taken on the task of marriage licenses from the Council and Committee Services section. So the actual increase in workload coupled with the high turnover has put a lot of pressure on the division as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, 4 of the original recommendations had not been started yet, all 4 related to the licensing section, but due to some staffing changes and vacancies at the management level, no plan was put in place to address the issues. While staff were frustrated with this lack of action, the recommendations are going to be considered as part of the larger licensing review, which is currently taking place. So in order to address these lingering risks, I've made the following recommendations to the division. First, although more staff are needed in corporate records and are potentially needed in licensing, I recognize that new funding is scarce, and I also didn't want to presuppose the outcome of the licensing review. So in the meantime, it's important that staff continue to try to streamline their processes and create capacity within their existing complement by removing non-value-added tasks and taking a critical look at what the customer values. For example, are there tasks that they continue to do because they've always done them but don't provide any value to the customer? There may be opportunities to decrease cycle time in some tasks. This is an ongoing endeavor and something that staff are already committed to, and key staff within the division have also received training on lean management techniques, which will help with this analysis. One of the findings from the staff interviews was that although regular monthly staff meetings had been implemented, several of them have been canceled recently due to workload. This was upsetting for staff who valued the information sharing which took place at the meetings. I'm recommending that every effort be made to maintain the team meetings, regardless of workload, since they are valued by staff and serve an important purpose both in terms of communication and staff morale. Next, staff need to aggressively make time each week or month to document their desk procedures and cross-train each other on mission-critical tasks. Although we hope that the turnover will eventually slow down, having this in place will ensure continuity of service and the ability to share workload across the sections in times of peaks and valleys. They may not feel that they have the time to do this right now, but it is very important that they do so to make life easier when absences do occur. And the final 2 recommendations are related to tracking metrics in the licensing section. In the original audit, I had recommended that they start tracking their time in order to determine how much capacity they have or didn't have for new work, since it was unknown at that time. It didn't happen immediately, but for the last 9 months, they have been tracking the time it takes for every single transaction that they complete each day. Given that this is a very time-consuming process, which was meant simply for a one-time analysis, I'm recommending that the metrics be reviewed with the new manager of licensing once they're hired to determine which ones must continue to be tracked for either management or legislative purposes. All other non-essential metrics should cease to be tracked. The data that has been captured already should be analyzed to determine the capacity of the section and whether more staff are actually required. So are there any questions on this follow-up review before I continue?
We have some. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Mr. Tasker. So I'm a little bit puzzled when you say that the move to more electronic forms is increasing the workload. I would have thought that that would have eased the workload, because once you have a template for something, you should be able to slot in the information. Is that not happening? Not
for the corporate records and archives staff. So their job is to make sure that we retain all the appropriate records according to the records retention schedules. People still keep their paper copies and they keep electronic copies, so what they're seeing is essentially a doubling of their workload right now. And as more and more electronic records are captured, people don't know what to do with them, they don't know how to store them, so they're being relied on very heavily to try by other divisions to try and manage their records.
Okay, so is there a way that we should be sending the message that you either that you find a way, or is there a training process that maybe we need to implement to teach staff across the city how to preserve or archive their electronic reports or the electronic data that they need?
Yeah, I believe there is a capacity course already in terms of how to manage your electronic records and records management in general.
Okay. Do we have an understanding of what the uptake is on that?
I don't know offhand.
Okay, maybe that's a question for other staff. My other question was related to, you talked about the licensing department and that there's a standard of meetings. You might have to go back a slide because I was kind of writing it at the same time as you were talking. So it was related to tracking metrics with regards to the licensing department, and you said there has been a change in expectations there. Are there expectations for that department that are different for other departments and other staff at other departments?
No, it was simply a change in management within that section. They weren't required to track them previously, and then we had the new manager come in, and she took a look at the audit recommendations and decided to implement the tracking of the metrics. Maybe misunderstood my intent in that I just wanted maybe 1 or 2 months worth of data so that we could calculate whether they had capacity or not, and it's been going on for about 9 months now.
Okay. I wasn't just the tracking metrics, actually. I think there was also, you mentioned staff meetings or some other new initiatives that are happening. Is that not?
Those are standard business practices that most divisions do. They just weren't being done in that section previously.
Okay, so it's good news that this is happening now because it
Yes.
makes everybody a bit more accountable, right?
Yes, and they're valued by staff as well. I mean, it's a good communication tool to have regular meetings. It's like I said, one of the high risks is not having documented desk procedures and whatnot, so that when you have absences, you have someone that can step into the role. So those are all very critical things that need to happen. No time was spent on them before. So once you add those into the mix, your workload goes up.
So would that not just level off once everybody's sort of in the groove of doing that? And I can see where you would say the workload has increased because now there's that expectation of those meetings and the metrics and everything else. But once everybody is on board with this and it sort of starts to move along, would that not be a reduced workload? Because everybody's sharing and understanding and helping each other out.
The intent is, yes, like with the cross-training between the sections, it's hoped that when licensing is in a period of high workload, for example, at the annual renewal time, that staff from the council and committee services could help out, and vice versa if there's times in council and committee services that they need help. So,
do you have an estimated time frame that you think that would actually start to happen?
They're already ongoing right now. They are spending some time. My recommendation was more to make sure it remains a focus and that they do get through it all. They are, even right now, they're suffering they're down at least 2 staff, if not more. So it is a challenge for them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
You started out with 14 recommendations. And at this point, 6 of those 14 have not been completed, and you've come forward with another 5 recommendations, and yet you state that no further follow-up audits will be conducted. Do you not? Is there not a part of the program for you to follow up until all your recommendations are completed, or there's an end in sight?
Typically what happens when I do a follow-up review, if there are significant issues that come forward, then I would do another follow-up review later on. I didn't feel that any of the recommendations were significant, and I felt confident that Christine is in the process of implementing these within her division. Certainly once we've gone through all services, as we'll talk about later in the service prioritization, then it would come up for a review again at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Ms. Tasker. I had the same concern as Councillor Fernandez about the document management. Is that a significant factor of the requirement or the future ask of an FTE?
Yes.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, we do have some electronic document management, but we're also doing paper management. So is that essentially a duplication of the same work at this point?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe we approved a tender not long ago about, we actually have microfiche as well. So, and I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around, like, are some of these more hard copy? Do we even know if that's a legislative requirement, or are we just not up with the newer
For some things
technology?
it is, but for some things it certainly isn't. I know that they have a project plan set out right now for the implementation of the next phase of Laserfiche, in which they'll be looking at, there's a number of divisions that will be candidates to start moving their paper records onto electronic formats. But in the meantime, there's a lot of places where people have email, for example, and then they print the hard copy of the email and they file it in their folder. So you've got two different records of the same information. That's just one example. You can see that across the board in all divisions.
Okay, so is it possible, instead of requiring a new FTE in the future, that some of these more advanced technologies might offload some of the workload that the staff have in that department?
I can't answer that. I would need to refer that to the Corporate Records and Archives staff, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. Karina, it's always a pleasure to hear from you and get a little snapshot window into what you've been auditing. These are primarily administrative concerns that you're sharing with us, and so the follow-up I know would be at the admin level, not necessarily the council. We won't be hearing back, will we, about any further follow-up?
No.
And that's fine. I just wondered, though, will these be followed up in terms of performance tracking for each department that you audit by whoever supervises that department or the division? Or what's the process once you leave it with them after you've done a follow-up audit? How is then that division accountable to complete all the recommendations?
At this point, there is no further follow-up after that. I'm a one-person division. I don't have the capacity to keep following up to make sure and keep hounding people to get things completed. I trust that the directors will complete the recommendations as stated.
So maybe it's a question of Mr. Wilmer.
Mr. Wilmer?
So through the mayor, yes, I assure council that at that point, when the internal auditor hands it over, then from the department head to the directors and the managers, that does become part of management's work program and performance objectives, is to continue to resolve these issues and to continue to seek efficiencies.
So then the DCAO responsible for that division would be following up to, on a regular basis or annual or something?
Yes, absolutely. The internal audit and the follow-up audit provide the basis for performance objectives for the managers.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And then I just was wondering about the lean management techniques. Is that something that you're recommending just in this division that you've audited, or are those techniques the type of thing that you are recommending throughout the organization?
I'm glad you asked because I'm passionate about this. It is something that we are researching into implementing across the corporation. We're still in the preliminary discussion phases right now. There's a number of us that have taken some training on it. We don't know where we're going to go with it yet, but there's definitely potential, and I think it's a great body of work that can be applied to help us give more value to our citizens and to cut out the non-value add in our processes.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask about the handwritten notes that usually are being completed by our staff here, but now I see for the first time typing happening, so that's exciting to see. Yes. Yeah, good timing. Thanks.
Okay, that looks like that's all of the questions. Thank you.
All right.
So we'll now move on to item number 2, which is the service review prioritization refresh.
No,
the second part of accounting, sorry.
All right. So the second review is the accounting comprehensive review. And as with many comprehensive reviews, the objective is to analyze all the working pieces in a division just to ensure that they're working in harmony. This includes looking at the services provided and the underlying processes, the risks inherent in their business, what controls are in place to protect the corporation from fraud or loss, and the roles, responsibilities, and culture within the division. So after the initial risk assessment that we performed, we decided to focus our investigations on process reviews and on controls testing. So I should mention at the start that this review was conducted by myself, Catherine Dever, and Justin Watkins, and I thank them for their hard work on this review. For this review, we consulted with all the staff within the division, 44 staff in other divisions which interact with accounting services and staff, several external stakeholders who use accounting services, such as Kitchener Public Housing, Kitchener Public Library, the Waterloo Regional Insurance Pool, and neighborhood associations. Although the questions varied slightly between the groups, in general, they were all asked about the strengths and weaknesses of the division and where improvements could be made. A risk assessment was done by staff to rate the impact and likelihood of the risks which emerged from the consultation phase. These were prioritized based on the resulting scores. We then performed process reviews on a selection of processes that were identified through the consultation, and we had staff prioritize them, since we didn't have time within the project to cover all processes. We identified areas of high risk through the consultation and through best practice in which to perform controls and compliance testing. We reviewed relevant policies, strategies, and business plans, work procedures, and metrics as background to the review. And finally, we did some limited benchmarking with other similar-sized municipalities in the topics of check audits, accounts payable filing processes, gift certificates, and per diems. So our analysis has shown that the accounting division has a very strong foundation from which to build other improvements on. They are starting with a very positive workplace culture, which is characterized by trust, respect, and collaboration. They place a focus on continuous team building and a desire to improve processes. They are open to change and welcomed this review. Accounting staff are highly regarded by both internal and external stakeholders for their attention to detail and their accuracy when dealing with transactions, as well as their expertise, their professionalism, and friendly service. They are flexible and strive to work with their clients to find win-win solutions which strike a balance between maintaining appropriate controls while balancing the need for operational efficiency. Since the primary focus of this review was on process reviews and controls testing, the majority of the 68 recommendations that were made concentrated on improving efficiency and effectiveness, reducing manual effort, and enhancing communication throughout the organization. The areas for improvement in the process reviews were identified through a variety of workshops with input from both our review team and frontline staff. In the workshops, the current process was mapped out, pain points and bottlenecks were identified, and the process was looked at from the perspective of the customer and what they expect. An effort was made to eliminate non-value-added tasks and streamline the processes. In the controls testing portion of the analysis, it was found that for the most part, controls were sound and adequate to protect the corporation against fraud and theft. There were a few minor areas for improvements, which I'll take you through shortly. In addition to the findings within the process and controls testing, the risk assessment also highlighted that the two highest risks to the division are the lack of cross-train backups in some roles and the lack of process documentation, which, as I mentioned previously, is a similar finding in the Legislative Services Review. In accounting, the workload is constant and has several strict deadlines, such as payroll processing and payment of vendors. When one staff is absent, it can jeopardize the continuity of service if there is no one to step in and do the work while they are away. Having written desk procedures is critical to business continuity, as is having trained backups. So on the next 3 slides, I'll take you through a few of the high-level recommendations from the process reviews, the control testing, and the other recommendations. I've chosen to highlight the ones that have the most impact and that would be most recognizable to you. Within the 68 recommendations presented to staff, there are many more detailed improvements that should be made, which I won't go into today. So the first process that we looked at was gift certificates. We found that the current process of selling paper gift certificates through accounting is a very manual process, which is inconvenient for customers in that they must come to the 3rd floor to purchase the paper certificates, and they can only use cash or debit as payment. We are recommending that they continue selling these in the short term, as there is value to the corporation, but that they pursue reloadable gift cards as part of the class replacement project in the future. The new pin pads at all the locations as part of that installation would be required in order to make the cards work. The benefits will be customer satisfaction of being able to purchase cards at any city location with any payment method, increased revenue as these could be more aggressively marketed as gift ideas, and it would reduce manual work. The next area that we looked at was check audits. In the accounts payable area, there is a process for multiple levels of check audits before the checks are mailed to vendors. Due to the low risk of error and other system controls which are in place, we are recommending significantly reducing the number and level of audits. This would result in a combined time savings for accounts payable and the accounting analysts of between 160 and 210 hours per year, which equates roughly to 5 to 6 weeks of time. Also in accounts payable, it was found that a large proportion of invoices arrived with no purchase order number and no contact name. This stems partly from staff not following the appropriate procedures for purchasing goods or services and drives a lot of work in the accounts payable area. Through a cross-functional group approach with supply services, staff recommended some solutions such as clarifying the authority for who can purchase goods and services, establishing and communicating a purchasing protocol for when to use certain purchasing methods, and the proper process to do so, and then creating consequences for non-compliance with the process. It was also found that the current process allows staff to purchase goods with no management oversight for amounts less than $3,000 through field orders and for amounts less than $500 through parked invoices. We are also recommending an online approval path be established in SAP for field orders and that the distinction between parked invoices and field orders is removed. So in other words, they would all be field orders going forward, which require management approval before being paid. The benefits to be realized include clarity of roles, greater oversight and authority, improved awareness of the proper process, and greater fiscal responsibility. We also looked briefly at the filing process and the amount of paper generated within the accounts payable section, as this was a pain point for staff. We recommended working with records management to pursue electronic workflow solutions such as Laserfiche, at the same time that the division investigates moving towards electronic funds transfer as an alternative to check payments. This would lead to simplified record keeping and a reduction in paper. We also looked in the payroll area, and we are recommending moving towards electronic pay stubs and T4s wherever possible, and working in partnership with HR and other staff to implement a communications and promotion campaign to encourage use. There are a host of benefits to be realized, including the cost savings of the paper, toner, envelopes, and postage, time savings for staff in many divisions who touch the stubs as they get delivered to staff, and reduction in the multiple handling, greater security of personal information, and an increased capacity of the mail machine to do other jobs. So this next slide is the recommendations related to the controls testing. There were actually 6 areas which were selected for the controls testing, which included journal entries, social insurance numbers, separation of duties, duplicate payments, purchase orders less than $3,000, and payroll controls. So as I mentioned, overall we found that there are multiple levels of control in place to protect the city from fraud and theft, and that accounting is very good at identifying the appropriate control to put in place, balancing both the need for protection against operational effectiveness. There were, however, some isolated areas of concern which were identified through the testing, and recommendations have been made to mitigate the risks in the future. So the first area that we looked at was journal entries. Right now, the approval process is that journal entries are made and the approval is obtained afterwards. So we tested to see whether all journal entries had sufficient backup and signatures. Through this sample of journal entries that we reviewed, there were some examples where backup and approval was not found, but mainly in areas outside of finance. So we need to communicate with those other areas to make sure that they're doing the process properly. When reviewing a list of staff who have access to SAP to process journal entries, it was found that there's quite a few people that have access but may not need it. including the SAP Business Solutions staff. So we're recommending a regular review of who has access to process the entries to address this, and that SAP Business Solutions staff not be allowed to make journal entries as they have no business need to do so and are acting in a technical support role only. And finally, there is a recommendation to revisit the option to move to online SAP approvals in the future, which would mean moving to a paperless environment. Separation of duties was mentioned in the interviews and the risk assessment as being a big concern, with staff throughout the corporation who have access to perform all functions within SAP. We wanted to perform a comparison between a standard separation of duties matrix, which indicates if you have access to a particular function within SAP, you should not have access to other functions in order to prevent fraud. Unfortunately, we were told that this would be an extensive exercise and not something that the SAP Business Solutions team could tackle at this time because they were dealing with the install of the SAP modules. Therefore, we've recommended that this work be prioritized for a later date and be performed annually for all SAP users. The next area of review was duplicate payments, which can happen if an employee purchases goods or services using their corporate Visa card, but then the vendor sends an invoice to accounts payable, which gets paid. Accounts payable staff have pointed out that they often catch the duplicate payments, but that there may be some that are slipping through the cracks. So we performed a two-file match between all vendor checks and Visa payments for an entire year based on the vendor name and amounts to see how pervasive this was. The good news is that there were only 5 payments totaling less than $600 that were actually paid twice. So we're recommending that we set up a similar two-file match process on a quarterly basis to catch any future duplicates proactively. And the final area for review is payroll controls. The two most common control issues in any payroll operation are incorrect source deductions and ghost employees, where fictitious employees are set up by a fraudster who then receives the payment. It was found that the controls that the city has in place are adequate to protect against these risks, and they follow best practice. It was found that sensitive payroll information, however, was being stored in unlocked cabinets. So we've recommended that all payroll files be in locked locations going forward, which is already happening. The process for making retroactive and off-cycle payments was also reviewed, and a sample was taken to review for supporting backup and approval of these types of entries. While the backup was found to be adequate for most payments, there were some payments that were automatically generated by PeopleSoft for new employees who had not set up direct deposit information yet that did not have backup. This was because no manual intervention was required by staff, so they had nothing that would be considered backup to attach to the check run. However, there is a space on the check run control sheet to indicate what each check is for, so we're recommending that this notation be made so that it is clear why each payment has been made. The final area of recommendations relates to the 2 risks that I mentioned earlier, and we're recommending simply that they dedicate time each month to document their desk procedures and cross-train staff across the sections, particularly in payroll and accounts payable, in order to ensure continuity of service in the times of staff absence. So I'll wrap up this topic just by reiterating that accounting is starting from a very strong position. They have a good culture, they focus on continuous improvement, and they are diligent with the controls. The recommendations made in this review aim to build on this and enhance their efficiency, effectiveness, and controls. Many of the recommendations require the division to work with other stakeholders, such as IT, HR, supply services, and SAP Business Solutions in order to implement them. As with other reviews, the director will have 3 months to prepare a management response to the audit and how they will address the recommendations. So I'll open up now for questions.
Okay, we have a few. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovich. Thanks, Karina. My question is pertaining to cross-training, and it seemed like even from the legislative services and in the accounting division that cross-training seems to be lacking. And I'm just wondering, what's the protocol with regards to cross-training throughout the corporation? Is it mandatory, or is it voluntary, or what is it exactly?
It's not mandatory for sure. I would say it's something that I am catching as a risk every time I go in to do a review. We work traditionally in silos of very specific job roles, and that's typical in a union environment where you're being paid to do a certain job. But from a business continuity perspective, it's critical that we have people that can step in particularly when there's like one person doing a role. If they're away, what happens? So I am recommending that in most areas that they start doing that, and I think people are on board with that.
Okay, so in other words, if you're recommending that, then how's it being implemented? Is it saying, like the manager or deputy CEO is going to staff and saying, listen, you have to have so many certain hours of cross-training, or is management going to go and say to staff and say, listen, if you guys do cross-training, we'll give you some kind of incentive or whatever. I know the incentive is probably beneficial to staff and to us both ways, but how are we going to see the uptake?
I can't really answer that because I can't speak for the managers who will be responsible for it. I'm sure every division will be different in terms of how best to implement it.
Okay. I would like a follow-up with that regard with cross-training throughout the corporation, because I think it's a valuable tool, and I think it's something that maybe we should not force, but promote more.
Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Actually, that was one of my questions, was regarding the cross-training, because I see that in a lot of other industries where that expectation is there. Just going back to your establishing a purchasing protocol, am I correct that I recollect that when you did an audit in the purchasing department that there was some concerns there at the time about the purchasing protocol and a previous audit?
This is more than that. So we do have a purchasing guidelines that have been set up by Supply Services, which outline all the different methods of payment and how you would go about purchasing goods and services. This builds on that to say when should you be using each type, and what are the specific steps that you need to go through to make sure, like for example with the field orders and whatnot, one of the steps is to make sure that you've told the vendor what the PO number is so they can put it on the invoice. That isn't apparent at this point, so we need to beef up the instructions a little bit more. And then having consequences at the back end to say if you didn't follow the process, what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So we need to flush those out.
So do we have an understanding of how often this is happening and what kind of dollar value we can put onto this?
You're testing my memory. I can't remember the dollar figure. We did figure it out, and it is quite pervasive. It was one of the highest risks that accounts payable staff had brought forward. They're spending countless hours tracing people back to try and figure out who created the PO, what the PO number should be on it, because they can't pay the vendor until they have that information to process it through SAP.
That's right. So, and vendors, of course, are dependent on those payments being made. I think you're right. I think that there needs to be a consequence to not following through, and it doesn't do the corporation any good if we're not able to pay our vendors because it's taking so long. Is there a time frame that this is taking? Is it taking an additional 3 weeks or 6 weeks before some of these vendors are paid for because of the incomplete process?
It depends on what the issue is and how quickly they're able to find out who had processed it. I would say we also ran a report to say how many times are we missing the early pay discounts and things like that, and it's not often. I would say that, I don't know if Brenda or Roger could jump in if there's any comment on how many times we are late for payments.
Brenda?
I believe the stats came back that I think we hit the early payment discounts 80% of the time. It's not a large dollar value to the city. It is about $12,000 a year we get in payment discounts, so we certainly take it. I think it's more a matter of the extra time it's taking staff to process when they have an invoice on their desk that may take, we can't pay by the due date. We don't pay penalties. The city doesn't pay penalties or interest on their invoices, but it's just the administrative time back and forth to find out who does this invoice belong to and which department needs to do the proper approvals, or even get it into the system. We'll get payments that aren't necessarily in the system yet to pay.
Okay. I think that's really important. Those protocols are really important to make sure that we track that. Sort of similar to what Councillor Innes was saying, I'd like to have an understanding that process is becoming a little tighter, As I hate to see accounts payable staff wasting their time trying to track down the POA, trying to track down all the information, who approved the purchase and where was it for, and all that other information. I mean, their time is better spent on other things, I think.
Yeah.
The other question I had was related to electronic pay stubs and electronic T4s. Do we have an understanding of what percentage of staff are now using that electronic service?
I do. A moment to find it. Unless you know off the top of your head. Sorry, can you just repeat the question? Just make sure.
What percentage of staff are now taking electronic pay stubs and electronic T4s?
An estimated 25 to 50% of hourly employees receive electronic pay stubs. Currently, all permanent salaried staff can access electronic pay stubs through PeopleSoft, and no hard copy is required for them. And then on the T4 side, 20% are provided electronically currently.
So we need a much stronger uptake on this then.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of a message that we have to send out. That the reluctance, I guess, for some people to have electronic T4 is probably, I can understand that, but more and more people are doing their taxes electronically. So I hope that we can get that uptake sooner than later. Okay. I think that was all. Thanks.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up to Councillor Ioannidis' point about cross-training. I mean, if gapping is a mandatory policy for wherever there's non-essential roles, then I think cross-training should be the complementary. It's just a suggestion to follow up on when we hear back.
Okay, thank you. That looks like that's it.
All right.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to number 2, service review prioritization refresh.
Oops. All right, so the purpose of bringing this report to you today is really to provide you with the refreshed prioritized list of services as you requested. Today we'll also gather your input on what your council priorities are for audit and service review work in 2017. We'll not be looking at the work plan today, but I will walk you through the process of how we will create it, and then we'll come back to Audit Committee in December with that work plan for your approval. So as you know by now, the framework that we use for prioritizing all of the services at the city consists of 3 factors, which are risk, operating budget, and date of last review. So the model allows us to focus on the higher risk areas and adjust for the list for services with lower expenses or ones that had recently been reviewed. So we've just completed the process of gathering the refreshed data for the model, and therefore we have a new list for you to look at today. Between now and December, myself and the 3 service coordination improvement managers will be working to create the integrated service review work plan. We use the prioritized list as the starting point, with the idea being that we pick the services from the top of the list first. We also look at other work that each of us is committed to in order to determine our capacity for the service review work. We will consider ideas generated here today that have council support, as well as any priorities that the department heads bring forward. And finally, we will consider external factors which may accelerate or postpone certain reviews. All of this will be packaged into a work plan, which will get your approval in December. So this slide shows the 44 services from the business plan in rank order. Due to the space limitations of the slide, I apologize. There's lots of operations on there. I didn't have room to put the specific sections, so you'll have to refer to page 2-5 in your report, which has more detail for the section names. I'd also like to point out that the chart in the report shows some shading of some of the items, and this represents areas that have had major reviews within the last 4 years, and therefore they're not likely to be considered for the 2017 work plan, even if they're ranked high on the list. So you'll notice that just under half of the services have been reviewed in some format in the past. So before I start gathering your input, are there any general questions?
Councillor Davey?
Sorry, just one on the last comment you just made. The shaded items are the ones that were reviewed recently?
Yeah, so on page 2-5.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong chart. Thank you.
Yeah, so starting with legislated services, this number 6 on the list, they were just reviewed, so going from there.
Councillor Fernandez? Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. When I'm looking at the number 1 and number 2 ranked on page 2-5, water utility and gas utility, that's a really broad department, isn't it? And is it possible that maybe we should be breaking out certain portions of that? I can't off the top of my head think of where the break would be, but do you see a clear defined line between certain areas of water as our utility and others?
If we decided to do a review in these areas, we would scope it out initially to say, is there some value to doing a risk assessment at the total level, and then are there certain sections that we want to zero in on? So certainly, yes, this is a very big division. And I don't think that I would be able to get into a lot of detail in every single area. I would think we would need to scope some things out. The reason why we have it in the big buckets like this is I had been requested by senior management to make sure that the 44 services are the same as the 44 services listed in the business plan, so that we can go back and forth.
Okay, and I think the same would apply to the gas utility, because I mean we have a lot of different services that could be in different buckets, and maybe there's certain areas that we should be looking at. Is that something you want to discuss today?
Once we get into the discussion of where your priorities are, if there's something very specific within one of the divisions that you want us to look at, then we'll write it down. I'll give you just an example I had here. Back at one of the strategic sessions, someone had requested that we do a review of the hours of service for community centers. So that's a very specific thing that you wanted to have looked at. We included that within the scope of the larger community centers review. So that's so that you can definitely tell me some specific things today, and I'll tell you where they fit, or if they're completely separate from these 44 services, that's okay too.
So I'm not sure how credible the information I have, and so it stands to be challenged. But my understanding is that there is some detailed work around some of our technicians that are doing work on our water installations, water heaters and gas heaters, water heaters and other work. That it's getting to the point where we're spending an awful lot of money on a lot of different. So this person does this particular job, and I wish I could really recollect, because it was quite a while ago that I was told this. And then there's another person that comes in and does that, and there's an ability for one person to do the same job, because somebody, now as I'm talking about it, so somebody who's installing a gas water heater usually has their gas ticket. I'm wondering if there is some duplication or unnecessary duplication of having jobs, two people doing a job that cross-training happens all the time as general practice. So maybe with our gas water heaters and our water installation, that area might be something that we should be looking at.
Okay, before I write that down, are there any other general questions before we get into taking ideas?
Oh, sure.
Councillor Galloway, yours is general? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, mine's just around the weighting of how we came up with the list. And I guess my concern stems from, or I'm not understanding how, if we want more of just an operational review, how that would end up ranking very high, because a department may not have a large operating budget, therefore 30% they get 0. The review is only 10%, and then 60 is like the risk, right? So trying to figure out how the weighting would benefit or could benefit more of an operational review versus more of that risk review.
The risks span across a number of different categories, and operational risk is one of them in terms of service delivery and how best can we deliver our service. So that is factored in there. And certainly this forum is a place where if you see something that's lower on the list simply because they don't have risk inherent in their business, then we certainly can put it forward as a council priority that we can vote on, and it can get put to the top of the list. And eventually we will make it through all services. It's just how fast I get through all of them.
Well, I do have a suggestion when the appropriate time comes forward.
There don't appear to be any other questions, so you want to continue now, and then I'll go back to Councillor Fernandez.
So my thought, what I would like to see moved up the list is the bylaw enforcement. And I say that for an operational review, understanding they have an extreme workload, but we keep talking about, especially in budget, increasing their resources. And I'm just wondering if, you know, in doing an audit review from an operational perspective, that that might give us some more information to go on in order to assist the bylaw department in going forward. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Obviously, there's some risks associated more from the personal safety, but I don't see them as having a large budget. They do bring in revenue. So for it to be, in my opinion, it's number 28 on the list. I'd definitely like to see that one moved up to where it can fit in, even in my preference would be 2017, but understanding they have a significant workload of reports coming forward. I don't know how much they'd be able to contribute in that short of a term, so I look to staff for input on that.
Is that it, Councillor Elwood? Still left?
And the other one that I was looking at closely was not remembering the review that was done with regards to the park's open space design and development in which is number 20. It was completed in 2012. I was just wondering if there was any rationale to doing a follow-up review in the shorter term than the longer term with regards to that one.
That review was the one done by the consultant. That was the overall review of operations, so it was included in that one. It wasn't as specific as that particular section. So if that's something you have an interest in, I can put it on the list.
I'd like to see that, and just with some of the staff changes in management there, it might be a good time to look at that one specifically from a high level. Yeah, number 20. Parks, park open space design and development. Those were the two that I was thinking of.
And what type of review were you looking at?
You can go to pull a mic over, please.
What type of review were you looking at?
More just an operational review.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah. Thanks for putting the gas utility on there, but I think water needs to be in there as well.
Ms. Fletcher, you want to add something?
If I may, through the mayor, what I can assure council is with 3 new directors in Kitchener Utilities and 2 operational areas, we will be reviewing many of our processes. The gas and water utility one in particular, the reason that I might suggest we push that off a little bit is Kitchener Utilities right now, workload related to the LRT project and Highway 7 has people pretty busy over the next year. So I had already talked to Ms. Tasker about doing a review further into 2017 or putting it on the work plan for 2018.
That seems like a really logical suggestion. You're absolutely right. I really wasn't thinking about the impacts on the LRT to those divisions. So, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. My other engineering services, number 21. I'm trying to figure out how we could do an audit in this division related to the number of times we are using consulting services and the impacts of our staff and how that all fits together.
Sorry, what do you mean by impacts of our staff? And
I'm just waiting till she's done writing.
okay.
I think that there's quite often there are issues with some of the consultants that we've dealt with, and I'm thinking specifically around a particular project that was just completed. The project manager, one of our staff people, really just went above and beyond, which is absolutely wonderful. But is that saying that our review of the consultants that we are using is leaving our staff in a precarious position where they're having to do some of the work that the consultants should have done? So I think that there's, and I'm probably not articulating as well as I would like to, where my concerns lie. So I may think about it a bit more and then just send you an email on this, Karina. And that's all for now.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor Bravanovic. I'm hoping that maybe information technology may be able to be moved up a little bit as we are going to the e-billing registration. I think having our citizens' confidence in their cybersecurity is ultimate in getting more people to sign up for this.
Yeah. Actually, cybersecurity will be definitely an audit on next year's plan. We've already got things in the works to look for a consultant to do that. Kind of a penetration testing and to look at our policies and procedures to make sure that we are secure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. I too share some concerns with regards to engineering, and I'm wondering if instead of consultants as well as you can add in like how it's doing with its best practices, and as well as if there's a review on the fees, and how are we comparing to other municipalities?
Councillor Marsh?
Two things. Just following up on the point about when a department is extra busy, such as kitchen utilities during the LRT construction, is there any, from your professional opinion, is there any benefit to actually doing an audit during the time while a division or a department is really busy to see how they're managing that extra workload, or is it just not an efficient way to do it?
Sometimes it is. I would say in this particular situation, given that we are in flux right now with finding a new director and some of the staff positions too, I think it would be too much of a burden on the division at this point.
Okay.
I think it should be done soon. It's come to the top as the highest risk, and I know that we've done a risk assessment in the past of utilities as a whole, and it needs to be refreshed, so I'm going to push for it to be at least near the end of 2017, hopefully.
Okay, great. So even if we're pushing it off, we're not pushing it too far away. Okay, and then the other one I was wondering about, as a department of one, for yourself, do you have any cross-training happening?
I would say that the three managers of service coordination and improvement, we have a monthly committee meeting where we meet and share ideas, and we have a toolkit that we share of all of our templates and tools. They could probably step in and do one of the comprehensive type audits. They don't have the financial background that I do, but certainly folks in accounting or in financial planning could do those types of review if I was gone for a lengthy period.
And so then the processes that you follow when you're doing those types of financial reviews are shareable?
Yeah, the financial type ones are standard auditing that any accountant would have been trained on. So
I see. Okay, right. Thanks so much.
Councillor Schneider?
Yes, just one more came to me on underbuilding, maybe a review of fees for variance. I had some constituents that applied for a fence variance, and the fee for that they felt was quite substantial, and almost as much as the construction of the fence. So, sorry,
Sorry, what was the title of that fee?
A variance,
Variance.
applied for a variance for Committee of Adjustment through building.
So, Ms. Task, I'm just going to ask you or Mr. Wilmer, is the fee review, and we see it in a few areas here, something that sort of fits within this, or is it something that should be part of the budget process and the fee review that we do there? Mr. Wilmer?
Through the mayor, because the council approves adjustments to the fees and charges bylaw every year, there is a review, at least a cursory review every year, and there is some analysis done as to whether it's a simple inflationary adjustment or there's rationale for a more aggressive increase or reduction in fees. So that is something that is essentially core service for every year for the fee review, or for the fees and charges bylaw, rather.
But something more in depth than would belong here?
It could belong here, or it's simply if there's particular fees that are of interest to council for us to look at, you can flag them now, and we could even work that into this year's fees and charges update. It's maybe ambitious to think that it could be done for this year, but there might be cases where it's just simply being aware of which ones are priorities for you.
Okay, so I'll leave that to committee to comment further if they think it could be dealt with through the budget process. Councillor Davey?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I don't think I saw it get on here, but I wanted to add my agreement with Councillor Schneider on the information technology. I think when I look at the information that we have at the City Kitchener, I can't really think of an area where the smallest number of people can cause the greatest amount of harm to our corporation. I'm not sure last time we've had an audit in that, if ever, so I think that's an important one.
Okay, looks like that's it from members of, from councillors. I would really just look at sort of the operations area as a whole, water, gas, and the other parts of operations that were done in 2012. If we sort of assume that everyone is busy for a year until ION is done, that will have been 5 years since the rest of the operations division has been done. We know this is an area that's had challenges, and we've got a new team in place. They'll get an opportunity to get their feet under them over the next 12 months. And I think that might be a good time to actually do a comprehensive analysis of the area and see what should be done in order to make it more effective and efficient. And so when I talk about operations, I'm talking about operations, water, gas, like all of it combined. I mean, basically most of the cost functions essentially. No.
So what I'd like to do now is...
Oh, hold on. Councillor Fernandez has clicked in again, so just hang on 1 second.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I just, when I looked down, I had highlighted the Operation Winter Control Maintenance. You're saying the current review is we starting now, like over the winter? Is that the intention?
They're going to be collecting information on the current process and routes and things like that this winter, so that in the future they've got the data to go ahead and do a review, but nothing has been planned specifically for that review yet.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking that it might be hard to do a winter control maintenance if we have a winter like last year where we didn't have a lot of snow. Would winter maintenance outside of that be a part of the review? So when staff is sent to do other tasks, maybe trail maintenance or something like that, would that be part of that review?
I believe so. I know that we had discussed it regarding the division itself in terms of the ability to switch between tasks when there is a lull in the winter maintenance, and what roles various staff have so that they can easily transition between winter and summer tasks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Ms. Fletcher, you're okay? Okay. Back to you then, Karina.
All right. So now that we've got our list of ideas out there, I would like to see whether there is council support for each one. I am only one person, so I can't do everything. If there's anything that is not supported by a majority of council, then it won't be considered further. The ones that do get a majority vote will be put into the mix for when we're putting together our work plan. Again, I can't guarantee that everything's going to go on there. We'll do our best within our capacity that we have to make your priorities at the top of the list, but we'll see how much we can actually fit into the work plan.
Okay, so you want to list one by one? You want to?
Yes.
Okay. Those in favor of seeing water and gas utility continue on the list? Okay. So that's supported. Those in favor of seeing bylaw operational continue on the list? Okay. Yes. Those in favor of seeing parks open space continue on the list? Yes. Those in favor of seeing engineering continue on the list? Okay, yes. Variance fees, those in favor of seeing that continue on the list? Okay. Okay, so yes. Those in favor of seeing information technology continue on the list?
It's on the list.
No, okay, and those in favor of seeing operations on the list? Okay, so yes. So in other words, you and CMT have your work cut out for you to bring a set of priorities, and recognizing that obviously with the resources that you have, you can't do it all at once, and that some of it may work itself into 2018, maybe 2019, but you can sort of prioritize them along with corporate priorities when you bring that final report back. Councillor Davey?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if, I guess we can leave it for now, but I'm wondering if, because pretty much everything was approved, if staff does want to follow up with council, because in terms of prioritization internally, I leave it to.
Well, I think staff and CMT will make their recommendations based. They know what council priorities are. They know what corporately they think needs to happen. They're going to come back with a work plan for us. I think on the two areas of fees, if it can be done as part of the budget process, I'd suggest that be looked at through there as an initial cut, and if we need to go beyond that, we can.
Okay, I leave it to staff.
Well, do you want to, Councillor Ioannidis?
I know how we review our fees on an annual basis, and to me it's a big pile of list of fees, but I want to see the comparisons between engineering fees and other municipalities.
Right, and I think what we heard from staff was that is something they potentially could do for this year's fee and charges, and if not for this year's, then subsequently. Mr. Wilmer?
So for something like engineering fees, I think it definitely could not be done for 2017. The process for that is we work with the Home Builders Association and Liaison Committee, and I think that meeting has already happened for engineering, planning, and building fees for 2017.
Okay. So, any final words of wisdom from you, Ms. Tasker?
I need more help. No, that's everything. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for all of your work, and appreciate the updates and the dialogue today. Motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Fernandez, seconded by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor, opposed, that's carried. And we will have return at 5 o'clock for special council, because it says 5 o'clock as opposed to right after this meeting.